Okay, well, we may have a few more people filtering in, but I'll go ahead and get started. Start by saying thanks to everybody for actually coming out on such a lovely day. But basically what we wanted to do today was just spend a little bit of time doing a demo focusing on course permissions, how we set up a course to be permission required, and how you grant those course permissions. A couple of things before we get started that I just wanted to throw out there. What we're doing here is really demonstrating the PeopleSoft functionality. I don't want anyone here today to get too hung up on how I'm navigating around to the different pages in the system. We're working with the portal group to provide accesses to our user community where you'll actually see a link in your MyUMBC that says something like grant course permissions, and would just go in sort of like you do for all sorts of things now. And so don't worry about the 4 different things I may be clicking to get to a particular screen or something at this stage in our demo database. We're not going to put you through that in production. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is just sort of the scenario where your department is creating a course that you want to be permission required. You don't want any students in any case enrolling in this course unless they have been granted permission by someone in your department, the instructor, scheduling coordinator, advising coordinator, however it is that your department is actually working through granting the permissions. The first thing you do obviously is set up the course so that it is tagged as permission required. When you're dealing with a scenario where the course in question is always going to be permission required, so it's, the example I'm going to be using as we walk through is an English 399 course. You want it to be permission required all the time, regardless of the term, regardless of what happens with the course down the road when we implement prerequisite checking. This course is something you're always going to want to require permission. The first thing you would do is communicate with the registrar's office that you wanted the course set up that way at the catalog level. And I'm just going to navigate in and show you what a permission required course that's set up at the catalog level to always require permission will look like. And when you're going through the searches here, because you also have browse access to, those of you who are scheduling coordinators also have browse access to the course catalog, you can just type in a subject area and get a full list. You can just type in your catalog, your subject area and catalog number if you have that. That's the best option if you have all the information. Most of the searches in PeopleSoft are going to yield the first 300 results for you. So if you happen to have 500 courses, then you won't get all of them in the search results if you don't drill down a little bit. But you can see if we scroll down to the first page of the catalog set up in this course that we have set the course up as what we think of as permission required. PeopleSoft calls add consent, which basically just means that a student needs your consent in order to add the course to their schedule. And this course is set at department consent. And that's how we will set up a course if you indicate that you want it to be permission required. Once that's done at the catalog level, at the scheduling level, where a lot of you are working as scheduling coordinators, in the schedule of classes, there are also a couple of things that you either need to do or that you want to check. And I've set up a section of this course for spring 2009 in our demo database. And you can see here we have one section set up for this particular course. The first thing I'm going to do is on our first page, the basic data page, just check student-specific permissions. What this means is that I'm setting this course up so that I am able to give permission to designate a permission to a particular student when we move to the screen where we're actually giving the permissions. The other thing you want to check is under the Enrollment Control tab. You'll want to just look here and see, you see that add consent again. You want to just see if that is set to department consent. And if we've set the course up that way at the catalog level, then that defaults in and you don't have to do anything. If for some reason we have not, and a scenario where that could happen may be, suppose for the fall 2009 semester, you have a course that you want to create as permission required, but you don't want us to set it up that way at the catalog level because when we go live with prerequisites, you're planning to set a prerequisite for that course and enforce enrollment requirements that way. That would be a scenario where maybe you wouldn't ask us to set up a permission at the catalog level and just have that one term where you go in and just change this default to department consent if it's at no consent, which is what it will be if we have not set it up that way at the catalog.
And can you mention what if they've already created these classes for their schedule and it was defaulted to no consent? And if you change it at the catalog level and make it then department consent, it does not automatically change the ones that you've already created.
Right. If you've already created courses that are department consent and we change that at the catalog, you will still, or I'm sorry, if you've set up a course as no consent now and decide that you want to have that course be permission required, even if we change it at the catalog level, because that section has already been created, you'll still need to change that to department consent instead of just checking it to make sure that it's there.
Every time?
Sorry?
Every year, every semester?
Not going forward, no. If you ask us to set it up at the catalog as department consent, then going forward into future terms that you have not scheduled for yet, it will default. And once you've done that, you just save, and that's really all there is to setting up a course to be permission required. So now we'll just look at what you do with a student in that scenario. And again, this is sort of dealing with granting permission for a permission required course.
What does the student-specific permissions actually do on the basic data tab? What is the significance of that?
You'll see that when we go into the permissions as we go through, that'll show you.
Is that optional, or is that something that is hand in hand with the department consent?
It's hand in hand with department consent for setting up a permission required course. It will make sense why it's sort of termed that way as we go through the other permission scenario, which is dealing with exception type permissions where a course is not permission required, but maybe it's closed, that kind of thing. It should make more sense after you see the other scenario why this one is called student specific. Okay. And again, don't worry about the navigation here. This will again be a link for those of you who are granting course permissions. And again, the first thing that a user will need to do when granting course permissions is define what term and what course they're working with. And same thing applies to the search. Give it as much information as you can, but if you're not really sure and you're just looking by subject, you can do that and search that way. Now, a couple of things here. You can see that I have one row of information here. Basically what this page is, or set of pages is the area where I manage course permissions for all sections of this particular course for that term. So this is where I will manage all course permissions for English 399 for the spring 2009 term. In this case, we only have one section of that course scheduled, so you only see one row here. But suppose I had 4 sections of that course. You would have one row of data here for each section, and to move back and forth in those, you would just use the arrows here. And you can see here that I've got some defaults, and I just want to talk about those a little bit. Basically what this is saying is that this permission is valid for sort of overriding or granting permission for the following scenarios. In this case, the most important one is consent required because it's a permission required course. But what this is saying, the way these defaults are checked off, is that my granting a permission here will also override the fact that the course is closed, that prerequisites have not been met if you've implemented, or if the course has a prerequisite attached to it when we go live with prerequisites in the fall. Career restriction is what you currently think of as undergrad in a graduate course. The system is set up just as it currently is, so that an undergraduate cannot register for a graduate course, whether that course is permission required or not, without being given consent of the department. Permission time period we will not be using, so that one you do not have to worry about. But these all default in as the scenarios for which this permission is valid.
So is it possible to set a time limit that permission is valid?
Yes, we're going to get there as we go through this. Yes, that's one of the nice things about this system that I know you could not do as an end user in the current system, is actually put time frames to your permissions that allow you to, say, I'm going to give you permission, but if you don't use it in 24 hours, I'm going to. Okay, and down here you see where it is that you are actually going to give permission to the student. And because this has been set up, because it is a permission required course, as student-specific permissions, the permission set up for this course allows me to actually assign a permission to a student directly by keying in their EMPL ID here. Now, in most cases, you won't have that information when you're working with a student. You will use the navigation here to get to a search screen that will allow you to search on information that you do have for the student, last name, first name, campus ID, and populate it in that way. This system is not currently set up that way. It's going to, if I click on the button here in the demo database, it's going to put us through waiting for the first 300 results, and I don't want you to have to sit here and do that. So we'll skip that now since I do have an EMPL ID. Yeah.
So we cannot use a username with the new PeopleSoft system. We have to use an EMPL ID or a 950 number.
Actually, it won't be a 950 number. It'll be, if you have EMPL ID, which in most cases you won't, you can certainly use that. Okay. Last name, first name, or campus ID, which is the numbers that the students have, or that we all have actually, not just students, on our UMBC identification cards. Okay, so once I put in that ID and tabbed out of the field, you can see I've now got some information here. I've given this to Joe. He has not yet used the permission. And you see an expiration date defaults in here for me. That expiration date, the default that comes in, is based on our academic calendars, what we have identified for that particular term as the end of the schedule adjustment period in which students can add classes. But suppose, again, the question that you asked earlier, suppose that you have several students that you want to get into this course, and you run into scenarios now and then where you grant permissions and they never get used, and you'd like to manage that a little bit. What you can do is, if you want to just adjust this to an earlier deadline, if you want to say, okay, I've granted you permission today, I'm going to give you 2 days to add the course. And if you don't do it, your permission will expire so that I can go on and grant permission to another student without using up all the room in my class. You can do that. What we will ask that you do is not change those expiration dates to a date that's after the schedule adjustment period. If you want to leave it at that default and give them that long to do so, that's absolutely fine. But this is not where you would manage trying to give someone permission to enroll after the schedule adjustment period. Those processes will stay the same, where the students have to go through the appeals with I think it's department chair and then Dr. Vioncourt's office. Yes?
Maybe I'm jumping ahead. Group, can you do it by groups? Can you do a group of students for permission?
You cannot do a group in the sense of like uploading 5 students and putting them all in here, but what you do is, just say you had a list of 10 people that you wanted to grant permissions for. You just add a new row here and go on down the list and populate as many EMPL IDs or pull up as many campus IDs as you'd like at one time.
And again, you might be answering this further down the road, but this so far is at the level of department permission. If it were set at instructor permission, does that change anything so far?
No.
The
No.
instructor themselves would not be able to go in and do this, right? It would have to go through a specified person and, well, the scheduling coordinator or whoever in the department.
Well, if it's set at department consent, the instructor affiliated with the department would also be able to do this. If it was, and actually the truth is, if it was set at instructor consent, it kind of works the same way, which is really what our legacy system does now. That permission is tied to what department you're with, or in PeopleSoft lingo, what organization you're tied to. So if you're with the MLL department, correct? So in your case, you would be able to give permission to any of the courses in MLL. So that's the basic scenario of giving permission for a permission required course.
Do you have to save before each entry? You know, when you were giving us the example of just clicking on the plus and adding another row, do you have to save before you do each plus?
I did out of habit, but you could go in and put in 5 before you
Okay.
saved. Like,
Yeah,
I
you
could have
do
added
anyhow.
students to all of those rows I created and then did the save all at once. The other thing I wanted to show you here related, yes.
If you make a mistake and you've saved, how do you undo?
If you make a mistake and you,
If you put the incorrect EMPL ID and it's the wrong person and you really don't realize that until after you've saved it, how do you delete it?
you could just delete it here, this minus button,
Okay.
delete the
Okay.
row. Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing you could do if for some reason you wanted a record of that having been done, that particular scenario I can't imagine you would, is just change that default date to something.
Is the student notified that permission's been granted?
Not as delivered. We're looking with OIT at ways to handle that, whether that's through the alert system or through some kind of application messaging that sends an email. But as delivered, that is not something that we have here.
So they won't know that they've been granted permission?
Well, like I said, we're looking at if there is something that we can do about that. We're working with our technical team on that. As delivered, that is the case. We're hoping that that won't be the case. So we have the alerts functionality in place. We're looking at some other ways that we could try to do something to deliver that, but as delivered, not. So in the permission required scenario, they wouldn't off the bat. One of the other things here, just so that you can see, suppose that your default for this course was consent required, but you wanted to identify in this particular student scenario that you were giving the permission for a different reason. For example, a career restriction. This was an undergrad, you were letting in a graduate course. You can also, these are defaults, you have the option to specify, if you want to, something different at the student level as you're granting these permissions. So if you wanted to show that for this particular student, the permission was strictly related to the fact that he was a graduate in an undergraduate course, you could do that by turning off these other defaults here, or if the course was just set at consent required, adding additional consents. So if you wanted later on to be able to look at this information and see some of the reasons that your students were requesting permissions, you could do that here. There's also
Also, the accelerated master's program where undergrads are taking graduate
Exactly,
level.
yes, yeah. Those students, I think now you do, even though they're in the accelerated program, you do have to give them the grad and undergrad permission. That's what the career restriction would be here. There's also comments functionality. Don't know that there's really any value to that for us, but it's there. And let me just make sure I saved this. Just to show you how things change a little bit as
As far as who's going to have access to do that, to give permission,
that's that'll be a departmental decision. If there are,
it doesn't have to be someone that's currently a scheduling coordinator that's undergone the training for, so it can be
No.
someone else.
Yeah.
Okay.
It can be someone else, yeah. Or many someone's else.
The faculty would already be kind of authorized to do this, and then it's an internal decision on what we do from there,
Right.
you know.
And there are some departments may sort of want to keep things business as usual, where if they're in a scenario where most of their faculty are administering permission for their own courses, they continue to do so. Others may look at this and say, this is a little different. Maybe we want to have 4 or 5 people in the department who do this, and sort of and that's a departmental decision. Whatever works best.
Do you know, will there be a virtual session teaching people how to do this? So like, say for instance, if my instructors want to learn how to do this, will they be able to learn virtually? Or?
There will be a variety of different, there would be a recording. I think we'll have some help resources out there as well, online tutorials, those kind of things. And probably, I know we'll have at least one more of these sessions in January, and probably do another in February as the faculty come back as well. So, I pulled up a different course here because I just wanted to show you that when you have a scenario where you've granted permissions and you go back into the system, you can easily see, without looking at a class list or any other information, whether or not the students to whom you've granted the permission have used it. So set these up a while back, and we can go in and see that one of the students has used their permission and the other has not. So that's the way you can go back if you are setting those defaults and trying to manage your dates a little bit and say, okay, well, I want to give some other permissions out, give some other people a chance. You can actually see who's taken advantage of the permission that you've granted and who has not. So again, that is the basic scenario for granting course permissions because the course is permission required. We know that we have other scenarios in which we don't want to make a course permission required. We don't want every single student who wants to enroll in the course to have to come and see someone in our department to get that permission. But at the same time, there are certain people or certain reasons that you'll have to give a permission. The most common for all of us, of course, is when a course closes. You have a course that you have 30 people, you've set up the enrollment for 30 people. 30 people enroll, and you decide that you can squeeze in 1 or 2 more students. And we're talking specifically in a scenario here where a course has closed and does not reopen. That what happens in PeopleSoft is if your course hits your enrollment capacity and then people drop the course, it does reopen automatically so that people can continue to register. It's more than, it's one of the areas that gives us trouble now. But if you're in a scenario where that's not the case, you still have 30 students truly enrolled, you're just trying to squeeze in number 31 because you realize that the room can hold a little bit more than your capacity, that's a scenario where you're going to actually have to give permission for a course that is not permission required. And to say for a course that's not, you wouldn't want to manage that by making the course permission required, because then every single scenario you're going to have to deal with. And what if then 5 or 6 people drop? They could be just enrolling themselves in the course. If you set the course up as permission required, they won't be able to. So in that scenario, you have to do something a little bit different, and it's called class-specific permissions as opposed to the student-specific permissions. So in the case where my course is permission required, I've set up a student-specific permission scenario where I can tie it directly to a student. In a case where I'm granting an exception, like a closed course exception in a non-permission required course, I have to use the class-specific permission option, which is a little different. And I'm going to go with a course here that I have not set up as permission required at the catalog or schedule of classes level, so that you can see how it looks different. And the first thing you'll notice here, it still has the defaults, just like the regular student-specific permission. But if you look here, class permission data, I don't have that option here to drop in student IDs. I can't choose a student drop in that student's information and give them a permission this way, that way. This is where we have to use something called permission numbers. So this particular course is closed and I'm interested in allowing one more student to enroll. What I do here, and I just said allowing one more student to enroll, but basically what I'm going to do here is generate a series of permission numbers that I can then give out to students to use when they're enrolling in the course. And to do that, I'll say I'm going to generate 5 here. I just type in the number of permissions I want to generate, click the button, and you can see that my permission numbers have now been generated. Still have expiration dates. I can still assign expiration dates to these that are different from the default, which again is also the end of the term. But what I need to do here is, if I'm working with a student and have agreed to give them a closed course permission in this scenario, basically what I do is give them one of these permission numbers. I have to tell the student the permission number. Once I've done that, because I don't want to put myself in a position of giving out the same number twice or that kind of thing, I click the Issued button and save. Again, it'll tell me who issued the permission, so that if you're in a scenario where maybe the instructor and an advisement coordinator or a scheduling coordinator or someone else in the department are all working to issue permissions on this course, depending on the day, you can see what permission numbers have been issued by whom, the date it was issued. You can still change the defaults for each permission here.
Does it show anywhere the name of the person that used that number?
Not until they use it. Again, so you're verbally,
What would that show?
that will show, if you give this permission number to a student and he goes in, what he will do is in his self-service, when he registers for the course, he'll have to key in that permission number to get into the course. Once he's in the course, you're going to see his ID show up here.
Gotcha.
So that's your way of being able to say, if you're keeping track of, here's the 5 permissions and I've given this one to this student, this one to this student, that's your way of being able to go back and say, okay, yeah, he used the permission, the right student used the permission, essentially.
So if you're talking to the student and say, well, I'll give you 2 days, and if he doesn't, it will expire, and then you can give that number to someone else.
To someone else, yes. You can set the expiration dates just as you do here. I said, this is a little different from what we do now. We're used to always tying the permissions to a student at the system level. Here you're communicating basically a code to a student that they have to use before it captures here that you've tied it to that particular student. That's not to say that you can't track what numbers you've assigned to a student and then go back and compare how they get used in the system.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe I missed this. So if we have a permission granted course and it fails, and I still want to grant permission to an additional student, will it look similar to this, or will it look?
If your course is permission required, you can use the student-specific permission method all the way. It's only in a scenario where the course is not permission required, but you've hit, you have a reason that you have to make that exception. Really, I think the only scenarios that you'll run into where that has to happen with non-permission required courses will be when courses close and you're giving permission, and when you're doing the career override, allowing an undergrad to take a grad course. That grad course may not be permission required because the grad school wants graduate students to enroll at will, but in that scenario where you're going to let an undergrad in, if the course is not permission required, you would have to use this methodology. And that is really pretty much the world of permissions. We thought this would take about a half an hour to actually do the demo, and we were pretty close to on target. So, questions?
Can we ask other questions?
You can ask them. I'm not sure if I'll have the answers, but
Okay,
sure.
I have 2. Is there going to be a way to generate a report somewhere along the line when we're doing, when we're setting up the scheduling? For instance, if I want to see all the the records, all the MLL records that I've created so far, and I'm not keeping a separate list.
Of the courses that you've scheduled?
Right.
There is a way to do that as
There-
delivered. The schedule, the print schedule of classes report, is that?
Yeah, I guess it would be that. And I don't know how to do that in essay.
Okay, we can show you that. We can,
Okay.
yeah.
Here's one question.
We were actually talking about, we'll be having a lunch and learn on that, but one of us can certainly show you that beforehand.
And we have a quick reference guide out on the essay website. If you go to the homepage on
And
the
it would,
website,
okay. it would-
under essay news, there is a link to the quick
Okay,
reference
okay.
guide for to run that report.
If you have any problems, send me an email. I'll be glad to show you how to do it.
There was another question that I had, it's kind of complicated, maybe, but and I addressed it to Sketch Reg, but I haven't gotten a reply back
Okay.
at this point. It has to do with controlling the size of a class, but it's more complicated than that. So say we're setting up MLL 190 and the instructors always want to let in a few extra majors, okay? And so we set up we have the room cap, we have the class cap set at a lower number than the room cap. Say the room cap is 50, the class cap is set up at 40,
Okay.
so that, it'll go that far, and then the instructor can let in the next 10 above that who are majors, just to reserve places for majors, okay. Now, that's all clear to me. What's not clear is what happens with this course happens to be cross-listed with 2 other courses, and what happens with the cross-listed courses. If we set if we ask English to set that course also at 40, what happens to the general cap for the course?
Well-
I mean, we're not going to be letting in English up through 40 and then MLL up through 40.
Right, well, what would have to happen is when you initially set up the course, if you're setting up MLL and English is setting up English, when we do what's called combining the sections, which is something that the registrar's office will be working with you on in the January, basically there's a table behind the scenes called combined sections, which is where we will take cross-listed courses and basically marry them up. Once they've been set up, once they've been established as, okay, these 2 offerings are being scheduled, they're going to happen, they're same time. This is the functionality behind the scenes that allows at the most basic level the courses to be scheduled, the 2 different sections, the one that is English and the one that is MLL, to meet at the same time, the same place, share the same instructor. Part of the sort of communicating in that setup will be to basically communicate to us that your goal is not to have 40 people in English and 40 people in MLL, it's 40 total. And when we set up that combined section, yes. And then what happens and why we don't set those up this early in the scheduling process while we wait till a little bit of a later time frame is that once we've done that sections combining and set that up, you can no longer make changes to those courses. Those then you have to send to us because they're governed by sort of that master table now. So if you then just, we're changing instructor or we need to change times or you don't have the flexibility to just, yeah.
Those extra 10 students.
Yeah,
and
so
that
once
also
we
is
create
3.
those combined sections, you'll work with us to manage those changes and tweaks and things that will happen. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay.
This is probably stupid. Can you print these pages?
You can. Yeah.
Is it print? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think.
Just be able to keep a list of who you granted permission to instead of having to go in the system every time.
You can print it. I think, Pam, do you see on the class permission, the data, if you go across that bar to that first little symbol,
This one?
touch that. What does it say download? So
Yep,
you
it
can
sure
download
does.
anything that's on a grid. With that symbol, you can download into Excel. If you don't want to print it, if you want to just download it.
Okay.
And,
No, go ahead.
all right, since these numbers that are being generated aren't being generated in the system to a particular person,
Mhm.
what's to keep the student A from giving his number to student B?
That's
who
why
they
we
don't
suggest that you
want?
check who actually utilized the permission.
What if they utilize it,
I didn't-
the wrong person takes it, even though I want her to give permission, I give her the number, and she gives it to her, and she registers. Can I unregister her?
If that were to happen, you would let us know and we would unregister the student. Yeah.
But we would only recognize the student on the basis of not a name, this one of these numbers, right? I mean, nothing in there is gonna say Fred Schwartz. It's gonna say
Well,
number.
the name will doesn't the name actually populate too once, yeah, you'll see the name as well as the ID once it's used.
And under comments, they could write a little note next to the number of who they gave the number to see if that's the person.
Yeah, that's a
that
good idea.
registered
That
for
is.
it.
Good idea.
Did you catch that?
The comment thing is good.
She said, under the comments field, see it on the upper, you can put in there the number you gave the permission.
So if I want to put in here that I'm giving this permission to Barack Obama, I could just, and then if I go back and look at it and Joe Smith used it instead, oh,
Is it unlimited number of permission required you can do on one sheet? Like, could I give 20 people from rec? Oh, is that where you would put?
in this scenario, you would just be generating, you would have to generate 20 permission numbers, but yes, you could do, and then if you wanted to go through, and basically email one to each of 20 students who had contacted you, or however that worked, and do the issued all at once and save, you can certainly do that. In the student-specific permission, going back to the permission required scenario, you can do that as well too. It's just you do have to click to add your rows each time you do.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Okay.